Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Nick Masters, Enterprise Sales Engineering Manager at Box, and Nick's also one of the founders of CBOS, which is a local community supporting the rapidly growing technology presence in Boston. I'm extremely excited for today's episode because it's near and dear to my heart, and I have a lot of passion around the subject of transitioning into pre-sales. Our episode is titled Out of the Box, a career transition into pre-sales, and I won't give away too much just yet, but Nick's got a pretty untraditional path into pre-sales, but when you hear it, you could hear the dots connect. Personally, I've had a very similar experience in Nick, so I'm really excited for the episode today. Enjoy. Nick Masters, how you doing this evening?
Doing great, James. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for being on the podcast today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is great.
How are things in Boston right now? Doing okay?
Things are in Boston. Myself, my family, all things considered, we got no complaints.
How's been managing a team during the pandemic so far?
Yeah, there's no script for this, right? There's no checklist on how to do it. I think everyone has to find out their own style, their own way. I think it's important to know who your team is, right? You got to know the personalities on your team. You got to know exactly how they're thinking and reacting to something like this. And that comes with a lot of communication, with empathy, making sure you're setting aside enough time to have the conversation with each one of them to make sure that not only are you talking about business, but you're talking about what's going on in their life. They're not living, some of them aren't even living at home right now. Some of them living outside with their family, their folks, friends, getting out of cities, that type of stuff. So it's been challenging on them and challenging on other managers, but you just got to communicate. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's a big key. Have you had to make major adjustments to your style?
I wouldn't say major adjustments. I would say the biggest adjustment is I'm used to traveling, being in person, having conversations with people and reading their body language and understanding the nonverbals as we communicate, whether it's with a customer or whether it's with somebody on my team. When you got a mask on and you're in person with somebody, you can't read those nonverbals and facial expressions, right? So, and then you've got somebody who you're making changes on a 30-minute, Zoom call or Google Meet or whatever the case may be. It's really challenging to make sure that you're getting into the depth of how someone's thinking and feeling during a time like this. But it's really important to make sure you do that pre-work and planning to work with your team and work together and make sure that you're learning something from them as much as they're learning from you.
That's a really good point. We all know that Zoom fatigue is super real right now. And so when I think about our prospect and our customers and trying to sell to them, given everything that's going on, like their focus isn't always where we want it to be in that regard as well.
And you brought up a great point. Zoom fatigue, as cliche and overused as it is out there and it's real. So when I think about this, I remind these concepts to the people on my team. And I think about the fact that if it can be a phone call, make it a phone call. If you feel like you are getting a little overwhelmed with being on camera and forcing yourself to stand in one spot or sit in one chair, get on the phone, talk to me, do the one-on-ones that we have as a team, walking the dog, getting outside, doing something that you might not necessarily normally do. And don't necessarily feel obligated that you're working exactly the way you used to work. There's so many other ways to get creative.
Yeah, it's a great perspective. One of the things I actually introduced to my team is a concept called cut the fluff and just cutting extra meetings out of our calendars. And then we've all been challenging each other to not be on video. So all of our one-on-ones have been walking one-on-ones. It's just kind of getting out of the routine, just trying to switch things up a little bit.
Absolutely. Multitask, clear your mind a little bit and, enjoy some of this summer weather that's approaching.
So let's talk about you. You are one of the founders of SE Boston, local community in Boston, but you've essentially launched a community right before a pandemic / during a pandemic. So how's that experience been?
We pivoted pretty quick, I'll tell you that, but it's been terrific. So here's why it's been terrific. When the stock market is booming, the economy is booming, everybody who's in technology in the industry is booming, you get complacent. You get complacent very quickly. You might build a terrific internal network, but you might understand that your external network is not necessarily as big as it needs to be. When we started launching CBOS, the idea was that it was going to be a premier community for sales engineers, solutions engineers, technology sellers in the Boston area. And the idea here was that we're going to get a group together who have very, very similar skill sets, interests, and qualities, and we're going to learn from each other. We're going to learn how to grow our network. We're going to learn what works and what hasn't worked. and we're going to have a great time doing it. And this was going to be in person. We were going to have guest speakers. We're going to have happy hours, and it was going to be very informal in a very learning environment. But as soon as we launched, then hit the pandemic, right? So all of a sudden we're in a position where the pandemic hits and we had to pivot. This is now going to be maybe less of a community to Boston and more towards anybody who wants to join and learn about each other, because economies across the world have been affected. The world just got a lot smaller.
It really did. And we're facing the same thing in Chicago. Because I run Chicago, or am part of the council with Chicago and have PreSales Collective, the goal was that the PreSales Collective would be this online virtual community that everyone across the globe could connect to. And then you have a local city, which has your couple events per year. And obviously Corona has changed that, at least for 2020, if not for 2021 and some of the immediate future. So it is really
absolutely
an interesting time with these local communities and trying to bring resources.
It's a key reminder that even if you're not career searching, leaning on a network to get different sets of views, it really benefits your career, not necessarily from a movement standpoint, but it benefits your career to get other perspectives and understand what somebody's doing that works, and then bring that into your own environment. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with CBOS. And so far, it's been great. We've got a lot of digital representation, a lot of virtual interest so far.
That's great. Well, congratulations to you guys on this. What makes me excited and very happy is that we are doing a lot for the community and for our pre-sales profession in general.
Absolutely.
All right, Nick. Well, I want to transition to our main topic today. Typically, we would ask you for your story and then go into the theme, but just so happens that our episode today is about career transitions into pre-sales. So outside the box, I'm really excited for this. I think we have a lot of similarities in terms of transitional steps to get to our career. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
I love it. Me too. Nobody has the same background. Everyone's come from different backgrounds. And it's so interesting to listen to where people have come from and how they've gotten to be at the point that they're at in their career.
I agree. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background? Tell us more about yourself, at least definitely prior to getting into pre-sales.
I spent nearly 10 years in the AirForce. As a kid, I grew up always wanting to fly airplanes. I wanted to find a way to do it where I didn't have to put up that costs, right? It's a very expensive career to get into. And I found, for the lack of a better term, a calling into getting into the Air Force and finding a way to serve my country, but also do what I want to do. And I went to college. I got the opportunity to go to pilot training, an incredible opportunity to grow a career and get through a very challenging program where I spent 10 years flying airplanes. I flew C-17s, and then I was an instructor on the T-6. It was an absolutely amazing opportunity to travel the world, see what I saw, and have a great experience at such a young age. And then I had to make a decision. I had an opportunity to stay in, to get out. If I got out, did I go to the airlines, which is what most people do? Or do I go use my business background and degree and do something completely different and use some of the leadership skills that I learned in the business realm? And I didn't have that calling to go to the airlines. It just wasn't for me. I did what I wanted to do. It was great. I had fun, and I wanted to go do something different, which was actually pretty rare. So it was an opportunity that I wanted to go seek out. I went through a number of different interviews. I was targeting a sales position because I wanted to have that customer facing, be close to the revenue kind of mentality. But I also wanted to have a deep background on just how business operates in the financials around it. I ended up at GE Aviation.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, one, thank you for your service. I mean, 10 years in the Air Force, that's amazing. What was your favorite thing about being in the Air Force for those 10 years?
Camaraderie, the people working together as a team. Even if you didn't get along with the people on your team, you found a way to come to that same end result. Whatever the mission was, people knew what it needed to entail. They understood their job. They got it done, and we got to the end of it. And we did it as a very close-knit group.
Do you think that has shaped the way you've approached managing teams in business?
Absolutely. I mean, when you work with a different team almost all the time in the military over 10 years, you learn about different personality traits, how you handle those different personality traits. You learn empathy, you learn how to talk to certain people versus others and how to approach certain conversations. And I think that's really important when you're not only just managing a team, but having a conversation with a customer, right? Like having a conversation and understanding what somebody is trying to accomplish and not just jumping to a conclusion.
Do you have a situation or a story while you were in the Air Force that kind of just flipped your mindset upside down?
Yeah, most of it came in training, actually. You're pretty much always training when you're flying airplanes. But when I was in what's called undergraduate pilot training, that first year and a half, it is just an absolute gauntlet. There's about a 35 to 40% attrition. So a lot of people get taken out. That's either for self-selection or performance related. It's an environment where you're constantly scrutinized and given feedback on an event. You could have what you thought was the perfect flight, the perfect presentation. Everything could have gone your way. The weather is outstanding. You couldn't have asked for a better opportunity to perform. And you do that and you come back feeling great. Well, when you sit across from an instructor, they're going to find the dozen things you did wrong that you never knew about. And that's all they're going to talk about for an hour. So you have to grow thick skin. You have to have that ability to be able to not only like ask for feedback, but actually crave it and seek it because it's going to make you better.
I'm really glad you say that. And it's really good that you had that experience because feedback conversations are something that I really like to have. And it's taken me a little bit to learn that people have to actually be receptive to feedback. It's just something that I naturally feel like, hey, yeah, of course everybody wants feedback. But if you're just giving it to them, people aren't going to understand it. It's not going to resonate with them. And maybe they don't actually action.
Yeah. And you got to understand that the person receiving it has to understand the value of that feedback, right? It's not defensive. It's not a personal attack. This is to make them better. You're spending time to make somebody better, which means you believe they can be. So they have to understand that that's a valuable trait to have. And it's definitely a learned trait. So if people aren't asking for feedback and trying to get better each and every day, then they should be spending some time thinking about doing that.
Do you have any advice for people that are not super receptive to feedback, even though they want to be?
Practice. It's what it's all about. I mean, like anything else, everyone has certain tasks and responsibilities in their job, and it's not done in a silo, right? It's not done in a vacuum. There are people watching, they're indirectly or directly involved. If you're an SE and you're working with an AE or you're working with product, there's something that you have a role in and a responsibility in, and you have to perform. And after that event happens, go back immediately and find and seek feedback. Don't look for just the fluffy, you did a great job kind of feedback. Get real actionable items that you can take with you and get better each and every day.
Appreciate that. So let's talk a little bit more about that transition to GE Aviation. It's surprising to hear that you didn't follow the trend to go into the airlines, but then you did make a jump to a well-known company and an aviation group. So you obviously had some subject matter expertise there, I'd assume. So talk to me about that experience.
As much as I decided not to go to the airlines, I did still go somewhere that had a comfort factor, and it was the aviation industry. As you learn and fly and spend time around airplanes for so long, you're going to learn a lot of the engineering technical elements of how airplanes fly, the concepts behind it, how engines operate, and that turns into business, right? And so how an engine operates is fuel savings, and fuel savings equals cost savings. And that's how businesses run in something like a GE Aviation. I wanted to learn a little bit more about how business operates before I jumped immediately over to the pre-sales side. And so I had an opportunity with GE Aviation to go through their junior officer leadership program, a pretty robust 2-year, 3-rotation program where you spend 8 months in 3 different rotations doing multiple different jobs throughout those rotations and learning a number of different elements across organizations. It was a terrific opportunity. I couldn't let it pass up. And I spent my 2 years in the program, an extra year doing a role that was more post-sales, but customer facing. I learned a lot about my technical aptitude as I continued to learn. I was not an engineer in college. Never really thought of myself as being the quote unquote technical person, but I learned that I had the aptitude and the desire to do it. And you learn a lot about that when you start to learn how engines are working, and then you're working on a marketing team to explain how the benefits of what that engine is doing is going to save a customer money.
That's a great experience. So how long were you at GE Aviation again?
3 years.
3 years. During that process, you started using Box as a product. Is that correct?
The company started rolling out Box. I was actually on more of the product side of engine operations and contracts management. And I was actually not even in IT or anything close to IT. I was in an environment where I was just an end user of a software tool called Box, and it was being rolled out across the organization of GE. And I started really understanding a little bit more about how this 125-year-old company can use and roll out something so intuitive that was definitely not something that GE would normally do. So I started learning a little bit more about what's this software do? Why did GE choose it? I started listening to Box earnings calls, and I got extremely interested on the organic growth of a piece of software in such a large and global company.
So you get enamored by Box, you love the product, you're listening to the company's earnings calls. What kind of connects the dots at that point?
Yeah. At the time, we're living in Ohio. It was not by choice. It was more by job. And we realized that we're now out of the AirForce. We can make a decision. We can go set roots somewhere with my wife and my kids and realize that we're in a position that we can make this decision on our own. So we wanted to be up in the Northeast. And I started looking at not only roles in the Northeast, but I started targeting it to what my focus was at the time. And that was getting into the technology field. And I wanted to get into tech. I had spent so much time in aviation. I felt like this was a great career move and an opportunity for me to do so. And lo and behold, I knew about Box because that's exactly what the talk was across GE. That's the first thing I looked. And they had a customer success role in the Northeast. It was another post-sales job, which matched up with a lot of the skill sets and responsibilities that I was doing today. So it ended up working out extremely well. And I ended up finding my way to Box pretty quickly after that.
That's great. So in your interview processes, were you like, hey, I'm just a Box super user. I love what you're doing. Like, I want to be a part of this thing.
It was pretty hilarious. You have to do a demo for when you're going through your interview process. And I actually was able to do a demo in the aviation industry about exactly what I was doing every day with Box. So it didn't take a whole lot of prep work, if you will.
That's awesome. So when you made the transition, what was the specific role that you transitioned to?
Customer success manager. So I was managing our strategic accounts in the Northeast, and I was managing those after the point of sale. So developing a relationship, understanding the sophistication of their use cases, and being able to continue to drive that relationship forward so we could continue to grow in that account.
Were there any aviation customers, or did you have to use that experience at all there?
It's funny, there were a couple aviation customers very similar to what GE Aviation was doing. I didn't have the GE account, but it was interesting to see there's so many similarities the way GE was using our software to how other organizations, aviation or otherwise, can take that conversation and make it a very understanding one.
I really love this concept, and I love your story about how you made the transition, because I think when we met for the first time and talked through this, it really resonated with me, right? Like, my story is operations for athletics and recreation, going to hospitality operations, and then going to a hospitality tech company, which turned into going into a regular tech company and has led to another. I think so many people ask, like, hey, how do you get into tech? How do you get into sales? And it's the transferable skills and being like that subject matter expert. And when you hear your story, you know, the pieces make sense. And people listening are probably like, oh, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But I'm sure at the time it didn't, right? I'm sure at the time you're like, how do I make this make sense?
It was a hurdle that I was not ready to jump over. And people say opportunity is a lot of the credit that is given to where they are in their career after a successful career. And it's absolutely true, but you've got to be able to recognize it or even create that opportunity for yourself, right? So here I am in a quote unquote post-sales role, trying still to achieve that after AirForce goal of being in sales and being tied to the revenue as close as possible. So I was doing my role, doing my job, and I was approached and asked if I wanted to take a look at a sales engineering position. And to be honest with you, somebody who was coming from GE Aviation, I did not know a whole lot about what sales engineers did, although I did work with them as a CSM. I needed a crash course in what sales engineering was. And once I got that, I was hooked. And it was absolutely my best transition in my career thus far.
That's amazing. And I love hearing that because I have the same story, right? Same agreement, same passion. So who was it that kind of tapped on your shoulder and said, hey, you should do pre-sales? And why do you think that they tapped on you to do that?
It was actually one of the managers, the sales engineering managers that I was working with at the time, who I later went and worked for. It was an opportunity that had come up. There was a spot on her team. She was looking internally for somebody who was coachable and knew the product and had the technical aptitude to learn and the passion to get in and out of this product. And it was an opportunity where we worked well together, and she brought this up as an idea. And immediately, I didn't necessarily say that I was all in. I had to figure out what it was and make that decision. And once I got the information, the rest is history. It was terrific after that.
What do you think was the biggest adjustment for you when you went into that pre-sales role?
The biggest adjustment for me was not jumping to a conclusion immediately. You know, here I am in a post-sales role. I'm looking to build a relationship. I'm looking to help solve problems quickly. In the pre-sales role, the first question you get asked about how to get to a solution is not detailed enough. You have to find out that more information. So if you're answering the question immediately, you probably still don't have enough information. So those are the types of elements where I needed to pause for a second, have them ask me a question, find out where that question's coming from, get a little more detail so I can give a better answer, and then be able to provide that answer in a very concise way.
100%. So how long were you in the individual contributor role before you decided to take a step upward?
I was in there for a little over a year, but as I do normally, I start thinking about where my career wants to go or where I want my career to go and how I'm going to make that happen. So I started speaking with mentors and with other managers and started asking them about the pros and cons about going a career IC or going towards a management path. I didn't yet know which one was best for me. I had managed people in the past in the Air Force, but I wanted to figure out where I wanted to go. Once I did this research and bounced some ideas off of others and we started mapping out a plan, I realized I'm all in. I'm all in on becoming a manager. I want to understand the strategy of the business and be vocal and impact that. And once I realized that's the path I wanted to go down, I needed to figure out what skills I was missing. And back to our feedback conversation, I needed feedback and I needed it quickly. And I needed to realize what it was I needed to hone in on and start having other people think of me as a manager.
So what was it that made you, after a year, decide, hey, this management route is for me after kind of looking at the pros and cons?
I think it was the ability to have a stronger voice for the people around me and be able to take myself, my experiences, and be able to compile that information, whether it's our corporate or whether it's in integration or whether it's some sort of a systems integrator, be able to take that information and be actionable on it.
What would you say is your favorite part about being in a management role or a leadership role at Box right now?
I would say having a team that's as stellar as the team that I have. And I'm not just saying that. I am amazed at the expertise that they have. I love surrounding myself by people who are smarter than me, and that's not hard to do. I love being able to watch them work and learn from them and be able to have the trust that they have to come to me and start asking me questions and not necessarily expecting answers, but being able to feel comfortable and trustworthy enough that I'm a good sounding board that's going to be able to at least guide them or help them come to a solution on whatever they're stuck on.
What do you think was the biggest transition for you in terms of managing team in a software company versus, we're doing the Air Force? And let me give color from this one. For me, I've been in some sort of people leadership role for a long time, right? And I think my biggest one is I was in hospitality operations as a hotel manager, assistant hotel manager, and you're running an operation of dozens and dozens of people to make sure things work. And I told people my first software managing job where I only managed 2 or 3 people was 10 times harder than that role. Right. And so for me, I was kind of shell shocked. I was like, yeah, I can manage people. I've got 60 people on a shift at all times. I feel fine doing this. But it was a transition. So how about you? Did you feel similar or maybe something different?
No, absolutely. There are some similarities. There's absolutely some differences. When I managed people in the Air Force, it was in a very strict timeline in a training environment. So you only have so much time to improve the style that somebody is working in before they need to be redirected to a different position. In the role that I'm in now, there's an opportunity to have that conversation. There's no specific timeline on how people need to operate their career. And you can work with different people in the ways that they want to operate their career in multiple different facets. And some people love doing what they're doing and just being on cruise control and doing it and getting a little bit better every day. And others want to completely change the opportunity that they have, maybe go into software engineering or product or be an account executive. They have the flexibility to do that. They just need some guidance at some points in time.
I love that you say that because I think that is, to your point you made earlier, one of my favorite things about being a leader, right, is that this role is not super black and white. Everyone can approach it differently, and you can be successful in many different ways in your approaches. And I think for me, empowerment of my team is one of my favorite things, right? Like you said, surrounding yourself with smart people, but watching those people push the boundaries and break status quo, I think that's my personal favorite thing.
Absolutely. And watching someone take your advice, even if you're not 100% sure it's the right advice, watching them take it and actually execute better than you would have, it's a terrific thing to be a part of.
Yeah, my big thing is I can say I'm doing a good job if I'm getting the most out of people, if I'm helping them reach their potential, because it's not me, it's them, right? It's them. If they have the potential, they're the one acting. It's just me kind of helping them find it. That's it.
I love it.
I want to get into some advice components, right? Because I think you have some really good experiences and some stories we could talk through. So what advice do you have further for people that are trying to make the transition into pre-sales?
I would say you have to understand the reasons that you want to do it. You can look at pre-sales and you can look anecdotally and someone says, oh, you make great money, or, oh, it's so risky. And, why would you want to do that? You have to be able to understand that your decisions to get into a pre-sales environment is yours and only yours. Now, you can get a whole bunch of information and make your decision off of that, which is probably the best route to go. But you have to be able to map out that same pros and cons list that I was talking about as I moved into a management role. You have to make sure that that is the path that you want to go down. And you know what? You can always make this decision and realize maybe it wasn't the best path, but you're going to learn something about yourself as you go down that road. In any career change you make, there's going to be some nerves. There's going to be something that you're going to have to really think about, and you might surprise yourself.
So how about for those that want to make the move to management or to leadership?
Yeah, same situation, but you have to understand the exact reasons you're doing it. If you're doing it because you want a title, not the right reason. If you're doing it because you want to be the person that helps coach somebody, grow somebody's career, and then multiply that by the number of people that are on your team, probably better reasons to do it, right? I would really suggest reading the book, The Motive. It's a very short read. Patrick Lencioni goes into this book about two different types of leadership styles, and it's a fable, right? So it's a story that talks about this scenario where these two leaders have completely different styles. One should be a leader and the other one shouldn't, but they both have the want, but for different reasons. So absolutely a great read. Then you can make that decision if leadership is for you. If it is, find that mentor and find them quickly and be able to bounce these ideas off of them. Get that feedback and find out what leadership advice they have, what skills you need to still work on. And as soon as you start having these conversations, these roles pop up quickly, and they need to have somebody in that role very fast. They need to make sure that you have been envisioned as a leader the moment this topic comes up. So those conversations need to be had well in advance.
You brought up a good point around mentorship, because I get a lot of people who bring this subject up to me. They ask questions around it. What's your advice for finding the right mentor?
You can't just force it, right? You can't go find somebody and say, you look like you know what you're talking about, or you have a successful career. Be my mentor, give me advice. You have to have a great give and take. You probably should have some sort of a professional relationship or personal relationship with this person. And it doesn't always have to be in the same field, right? It's just somebody who has an opportunity to see you in a different light and give you honest feedback. And that's an element that a mentor should be really great at.
I look at mentors as the reason I am where I'm at. If it wasn't for mentors and people giving me guidance and steering me in the right direction, and also being like, hey man, you're completely off basis, you should probably do this differently, I don't think I'd be where I'm at, right? But at the same time, I've always struggled with mentorship and making sure it's two-way. Do you have any advice for people? Because I do think there's got to be a little bit of two-way within a mentorship. Otherwise, sometimes people feel like, hey, maybe this is too much work.
I completely agree. A great mentor is going to be able to seek what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, learn from the way that they're providing their advice, and understand, not only just give advice and walk away, give advice and see how it worked. And then if it didn't, pivot from there and be dynamic with the way that you're handling that mentorship.
That's great. Well, Nick, I've had fun doing this. This has been a good conversation for sure. One that is very near and dear to my heart. And I hope that everyone listening is going to find this impactful and hopefully find some inspiration and motivation if they're looking to make a change, that this will hopefully help them do that.
James, this has been great. Thank you for having me. I love learning about everyone's history, their past, and their unique way of how they got into sales engineering. So I appreciate you spending some time learning a little bit about myself.
So before we sign off, I usually like to ask two questions. First one is, what is your favorite thing about the pre-sales role?
Honestly, the people. The people make the role what it is, the incredible diversity and backgrounds and experience that people have. There's no shortage of creative ideas that people can come up with in this role. And it's really an inspiration to watch.
That's amazing. And you've given us already a lot of advice for people who want to get in the role or get into leadership. But what advice do you have for people who want to reach peak performance?
You have to have the passion. You have to have that ability to be able to not jump to those conclusions I was talking about earlier. You have to be genuinely curious on how a customer is trying to achieve a certain solution and not just understand that your solution is the way to go. You have to be able to uncover and reverse engineer exactly what it is they're trying to achieve. And the only thing that's going to do that is passion and being able to have the drive and the aptitude to learn more.
I love that. Nick, thanks again for your time. It's been fun. We'll talk to you next time, okay?
Thanks, James. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one. That was a pretty cool story, huh? I really liked talking to Nick and hearing his perspective on the transition to pre-sales. For him to go from the AirForce to GV Aviation, where he was able to use that domain expertise, he became a box user, admired the company, and then applied for a job and got a role within that company as a customer success manager. And then turned that into an SE role, turned that into an SE leadership role. It's a pretty great story, pretty amazing, and very inspirational for those who want to take that same path. For those that are listening and figuring out ways to get into pre-sales, I'll tell you, lean on that domain expertise and lean on it heavy. I like that Nick talked about giving and receiving feedback. I really like that he talked about managing separate personalities on the team and that you need to understand the exact reasons why you want to get into leadership. Okay, PreSales Collective, thanks for tuning in. Check out other episodes at presalescollective.com/podcast. Share with your colleagues and peers and help us continue to share the stories of those in the field. If you do have any feedback or know anyone who should be on our podcast or you want to be on our podcast, shoot me a message in our PSC Slack. See you next time.